Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today are the Victrix early Imperial Romans, and these guys are a lot of fun to paint. The methods I've used today are pretty simple. I mean, we are just talking base coats, wash, and a couple of highlights. But since there are a few different miniature styles in the kit, you've got the Centurion, the Aquilifer, and what have you, I figured instead of just doing one dude, I would do all three. So we're going to jump around a little between these three miniatures. The paints for all of them will be listed in the description though, so don't worry about that. Now these did come to me courtesy of Victrix, so thank you very much to them for letting me have some. Let's get started straight away. Now this might look a little bizarre, but trust me, there is a reason for it. I've got myself a cork and some ordinary dressmaker pens because if you look at the back of the shields, the boss where the hand will fit in the back there actually takes the head of a pen very well. So what I've done is just dabbed a tiny bit of PVA glue in behind there to hold my shields while I prime them and apply the transfers. Now the transfers from Little Big Men Studios, these do require going over a white primer. So that's what I've done, and it's the reason why I've done these guys separately. Ordinarily I would just apply the shield straight to the miniature and paint around it, but these transfers are really cool, so it's worth a little bit of extra effort. I've used here White Scar from Citadel, but any white paint will do. Now as for actually applying the transfers, I am going to do that off screen. I will link in the description to a video where someone demonstrates how you can do that. It's just I don't have three hands and the right setup to really demonstrate that. So we're going to skip ahead a little bit here. Now I find it a little tricky to get those perfectly straight. So you're going to get a little bit of white showing around the edge there. What I've got is some Blood Angels Red. It doesn't have to be contrast. You could use an ordinary acrylic paint here. But what I'm going to do is just blast around the side to get rid of that white trim. And as well, what I'll use this for is load up my brush a little bit more. Get this so you can see what I'm doing. And just paint in the back, because most of the examples I've seen, the backs of these are painted, so why not? It'll stop it from glowing. Now don't worry too much about perfectly matching the red of the transfer. It's really just to stop that white from glowing through. What we'll do now is grab some weapon bronze from the army painter, and this of course can be any bronze color that you like using. We're going to paint in the shield boss first of all. Just take your time as you come near the transfer. But as well, what you can do, get a little bit of this on the side of your brush, and rather than trying to paint with the tip, just brush up against the edge where you want that little bit of brassiness around the rim of the shield. Now for the trim, that's done. For the boss, we'll apply a shade a little bit later when we shade the rest of the miniature. But with the backs painted and that done, yeah, they're ready to put aside. We will need to varnish these with the rest of the miniatures to dull down the shine from that transfer, because you can see on screen, my goodness, that's quite shiny, but not to worry. We'll get rid of that really easily. Now the figures themselves, I've started with a primer spray of Mechanicus Standard Grey from Citadel, but it can be any middling grey I would recommend. A little bit lighter won't hurt, but a mid-tone will help most of the colours we're going to use. What I'm starting with is the armor color, and I'm going to use here, this is Iron Hand Steel. I'm going to go over all of the armor. As you'll see, it's quite messy, but we are going to come back and tidy up some of these bits as we go. I would suggest here it's easier to lay down the armor color first and then tidy up any mess that we make than it will be to paint the skin and what have you and carefully paint the armor around it. So we start with a mess. We'll probably make a mess of his face and helmet when we paint the skin on, but it will be quicker to fix this up. So anything that I do to this fella which is relevant to the others, of course, I will do that at the same time. Now the next layer up, I'm going to use here, this is Topaz skin from the army painter. And for his arms and legs, this of course will be very easy to reach. Just a quick blast of this. I would still recommend wait for this to dry and see if you need to apply a second coat so that it's nice and solid. Now, it might seem like the tricky part is going to be his face, but we aren't worried about that at all. just blast in enough there that it will cover his face. Don't worry about the mess we are going to make of that silver. Like I said, we're going to tidy that again later. After playing with that for a little bit, I found that I didn't really need to go over all of his feet, but don't forget to paint in their toes. What I'm going to turn to now, this is Dragon Red, and we're going to paint in most of his clothing with this. Of course, clothing doesn't need to be red. We associate red with the Roman Legion of the period, but archaeologists have pointed out that these clothes would have been pretty much any color that was readily available. So if you want to have your fellas running through the forests away from Asterix and Obelix, you can just pick a different color. Don't feel as though you're stuck with red. Now for the Centurion, what I've got here is Wyvern Fury. This is actually another one of the cool reds from the Fanatic line. We'll use this for the crest on his helmet, and I'm also going to use it to paint in his cape. You could all do all of this in the same red, it won't matter all that much. But a little bit of variety will help him stand out just a bit more at the front of the unit. What we'll do now is the leather parts, because there's going to be some gold bits over the top of some of these areas, so better to do them in now. Just making sure I can spot where his belt is. I've got here, this is Dryad Brown from the Army Painter. Any slightly ruddy, warm leather color will work here for this. I need to have a look and see what bits actually are leather. It's as I reach this bit that I realize while painting the leather, I haven't assembled him with his bleeding gladius. So this fella had better not throw that pilum. Anyhow, what I have now, this is ancient stone. Any light beige or even off-white color will work here. Just a little bit around the neck of the guys who have visible collars, because this would quite likely be like an arming shirt or similar, and you'd leave that in a raw sort of linen color. You wouldn't need to dye this bit. Now, if you've got any fellows who are wearing the lion skins, what I've got here, this is Wasteland Clay, and I am going to quite roughly, first of all, go over the majority of the fur with this, really jamming it into the recesses, because the texture on this is going to take a little bit of time to do. You see, I am going to get some of the grey still showing through on this first coat, so once I've spent a bit of time doing this once, I will go back a little more carefully and give him a second coat. And for the bits on the lion that we want to be a bit more pale, what I have here is Barren Dune. Now, you could mix in a little bit of ancient stone to what we've already used, but having it from the pot, if you don't mind picking those up, it is dead useful. So a little bit of this on his back, on his face, and what have you. Now we have the fun of choosing what we're going to use for the wood on both the Aquila here and the Pilum. Now I'm going to use Paratrooper Tan, but of course it's wood. You can use whatever you might like here. Now the trap here would be in going back to the silver and tidying up now, but instead what we'll do is actually turn here to Retributor Armour, or any gold brassy color that you want to use, and start filling in those gold brassy bits. Particularly up on places like his helmet here, for example. You'll see this is where I can be a little bit less careful around the sides of his face, although I am going to do some of that off camera. But you'll be able then to tidy up the silver later after having applied this gold stuff. Now, I like Retributor Armour because it's not quite as warm as something like Weapon Bronze or Greedy Gold might be, and it also does cover very well over silver, so it's a case of picking the right tool for the job here. Particularly when it comes to painting these belts, it can seem a little tricky. Now, I have painted them brown already because I want the interior bits to be brown, but I find that turning them sideways and then just drawing my brush in a straight line along most of the buckles that I want, then I can flip them up and do the verticals. Same too with these little bits on the hanging leather. Just don't push your brush down straight away. Just flick it along until you start catching those little bits. And you can pick out the raised detail without hitting the leather underneath. Once I'm satisfied with the gold, I am going to go back now, finally, to that silver. So I've got Iron Hand Steel, and this is where, let's get in there on the side of his helmet, just straighten up that silver and gold a little bit. And yeah, I'm going to go around all of the miniatures doing this. So any bits where I might have made odd shapes or splurged a little bit, just tidy that up now. I'm also going to do the same with the leather colors, because I have got one or two little bits that I need to touch up. Once you are satisfied with your tidy up, it's time to go ahead and shade the miniature. Now what I've mixed up in my little palette here, this is 3 parts of strong tone to 2 parts of speed paint medium. Now if you want to make it a bit simpler, you can just make it half and half. Honestly, it won't make that much of a difference. But I do want it to be a little bit darker than mixing it that way. And the speed paint medium is going to help it flow in a way that the wash medium, that tends to be a little bit stickier, I find. So we're not being terribly subtle with this, just blorp it over the entire miniature. Make sure that it is getting into all of the recesses. And I'm going to go over everything. Now, any really huge clumps of it, like here on his little dress bit, tabard, what have you, just shift it around. Don't let it settle too heavily in any one place. Once you're satisfied with this, pop them aside. And we'll leave them to dry for about half an hour. Let's see what we get. I'm going to use the same mix on the other 2 miniatures as well. Now, the one exception is going to be on the Aquilifer here. What I've done is mixed up these same ratios, so 3 dots of soft tone to 2 of speed paint medium. And I'm going to go over the lion's pelt with this. There's nothing saying you couldn't use the same mix, and you see I am painting this on while the other isn't actually dry at all. I just don't want quite so dark the shading on the pelt here. Now once that has dried and settled, you're going to have loads of shading, and it's going to look just a little bit more reasonable. Now 1 or 2 of these patches are going to look a little bit shiny. That's just how these shades settle and dry. Don't worry about it, because we are going to matte varnish the entire miniature later. But for the red on the Centurion here, what I've got, this is Blood Chalice. And I'm going to do just a little bit of very light dry brushing across the creases in his cape. I probably need a little bit more paint on my brush for that. But just enough to pick out some of the high points. And I'll do the same across his crest as well. Just carefully across the top there to give it a little bit more depth. Now for the Aquilifer, what I've got is ancient stone, and very importantly a fresh and very dry brush, just lightly across the top of the fur, and then on the flatter parts of the pelt, it's got a little bit heavier to pick those out. We're going to go back to Topaz skin, and this time I'm going to cover over most of the skin again, but just leave a little bit of the shaded stuff in the recesses. Because we have shaded it quite so heavily, we can use our base coat here as a highlight. And now with a little bit of jasper skin, what I'll do is start doing the backs of knuckles, his nose, these little bits which will just give them a bit more definition. Because so little of their face is showing, just do the nose is what I'd suggest. Backs of hands, knees and elbows, that sort of thing. Just a little bit more curvature there. Now, to be quite honest, we've gone past the point where I would mass paint these dudes. So these steps really would be ones that I would do for fellas that are going to be in the front rank of a unit. What I've got now, this is pure red, and we're going to use this, once we've got some of it off my brush, just a few little bits of this along the edges of his clothing. And as with everything else, try not to apply too much of this, otherwise he's going to glow. Now the last of the highlights I'm going to apply before putting the shields on is going to be with some fur brown, and we'll apply this on the leather. Now same as with the red, you can be fairly sparing with this if you fancy, because it will very quickly overpower what you're doing. Now what I've done is popped the shields off, those little pins that were holding them in place. So you'll see there's a tiny wee bit which isn't painted, but oh well, you're literally not going to see it. Just a tiny bit of super glue in there, and then we'll pop it onto our chappie's hand. and hold that in place for a few seconds. Now that's applied, you can see, you might not have to highlight as much as you would think. So what I'm going to do is take them outside, hit them with a matte varnish, and then pop their bases on them. And I'll have the recipe for that in the description. So let's get a look at these fellas once they are all together. And so there at last, our Romans are complete. Now, I do really like how much the transfers actually add to the miniatures. They do a lot of the heavy lifting, and across a whole unit, they'll look amazing. But I do wish, if I have one minor complaint, I would like for them to be the same from top to bottom. The little bit of dustiness down the bottom of the shield might look kind of realistic. It might even fit the style that you're painting for, but I would prefer that they were, a single flat color and gave me a bit more room to interpret that myself. It's my one grizzle. Otherwise, the miniatures themselves are really cool. They're a lot of fun to stick together and pretty easy to paint. There is so much going on that you could spend hours painting these guys, but a quick job like this, I think, does just fine. So again, thank you very much to Victrix for letting me have a bag of these. I love saying a bag of soldiers. It's one of the things I do really like about Victrix is getting a bag of toy soldiers from them. I think that's great. Anyhow, thank you to Victrix for letting me have a bag of toy soldiers, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.